Hi there, Megan Thompson with Megan Thompson Coaching, and today we're going to cover how to help your sensitive child or teen handle uncomfortable situations. And so if you've been wondering what is appropriate for a sensitive kid to demonstrate in weird and uncomfortable situations or unusual situations, then you definitely want to stick around. Talking about potentially going to new doctor's appointments, hanging out with relatives that don't understand them or just aren't as relatable to your highly sensitive child, visiting older relatives who might be in an uncomfortable setting like a nursing home, uncomfortable for your child, right? I'm talking about this, but also for you. And so we can speak about different settings that will be tricky in parenting and for anyone. And it's important when you think about parenting a highly sensitive child to notice what your expectations are, okay? So how do we know what our standards are appropriate, right? So at MTC, we help parents of highly sensitive kids eliminate the daily meltdown cycle. That is children who are hitting, kicking, screaming, running away, refusing, shutting down, just totally checking out of just day-to-day life or daily expectations. And these are children ages 2 through 18 who are stuck in the daily meltdown cycle that we've helped. We've helped hundreds of families break out of that pattern in many, many countries all around the world, not just the US. So when we think about the standards of discomfort, we've seen it in all kinds of countries and cultures. And so we're going to speak about some different situations here. You may be raising your child and you want your child to be able to be polite, communicate effectively, tolerate going around new people or in uncomfortable situations like I said before, like a nursing home or a new doctor or a new professional setting or a new school, anything like that. Where you as an adult can understand and empathize that this might be tricky or hard. And it's also true that if your child is having a meltdown related to this intensity, this is absolutely something for you to address. So I want to cover this because many times parents of sensitive kids and teens can jump to the conclusion that a meltdown or a shutdown, which is an implosion, we're doing meltdowns as explosions, and shutdowns as implosions. So it doesn't matter how old your kid is. If your kid is out of control to the point where they have to totally tune everything out, or out of control to the point where everything comes out of them, words and hitting and throwing things, etc. It's literally two sides of the same coin, and it's the same meltdown cycle that you need to be focused on. And so when we think about highly sensitive kids and the fact that they are easily overstimulated, it's really important that you hear that overstimulation and that discomfort, even if your child is in this tricky situation, feeling emotions about it, sad, worry, concern, that does not mean that your child has to have a meltdown or needs to display this extreme behavior. So many parents of sensitive kids who are stuck in the meltdown cycle start to justify that this just is what it is. This just is what it is to parent a sensitive kid, to parent a big feeling kid. And that is simply not true. And so it's really important for you to notice that meltdowns and sensitivity do not go hand in hand. And so if you are uncomfortable in a setting like this, it's also obvious as a parent, this can be tricky to tease out, right? If I feel weird going into a nursing home or going into visit a family member in a hospital or, paying respects at a funeral or a wake, and, of course my kid would feel weird, right? Of course. we're not talking about eliminating negative emotions. That's nowhere in anything that we say in any of the shows that I've produced over the years. And we don't speak about that because that's simply illogical, impossible, right? Negative emotions are healthy, important, and big explosive behaviors or implosive behaviors are where your child needs to shift their behavior and where you need to be highlighting what can be done. That is what we're talking about changing. Your child is not their behaviors, and your child is not broken. Right now, they don't have the skills to manage those big emotions without exploding or imploding. And that doesn't mean that your child will never build the skills or can never build the skills. So this is really important for you as a parent to have that clarity, excuse me, because whether you're highly sensitive yourself or not, engaging in an event that you need to go to, right, an obligation, that is important and you want your child to attend for family needs, or for grieving purposes, or both, right? Then it's important to understand that your child can hold it together in those big emotional experiences, these uncomfortable experiences, without stuffing their feelings. And when I say hold it together, I mean managing their emotions. What does that mean? Noticing that this feels weird. This circumstance feels strange. I have worries about this. Telling you about their worries ahead of time, communicating them in the middle of the day, in the middle of an event like that, but in an effective way, pulling you to the side or sharing with you that they need a break. All of those means of communication are healthy means of communication in an uncomfortable event, like going to a funeral, going to a wake, attending, visiting elderly family members in a nursing home or in a hospital, visiting sick family members who are not elderly in a hospital, etc. And as well as starting to build a relationship with a new doctor, anything where this isn't necessarily routine for your sensitive kid, and one would assume might spark some discomfort, going to the dentist, etc. So all of these things, so these scenarios, right? I'm going to stop naming a bunch of them for now because I can come up with more, but hopefully you get the gist at this point. All of these uncomfortable situations have the emotional experience in common, but it's important to understand that the behavior that your child is demonstrating does not need to be extreme. And this is really important, right? Because as a parent, you might ask yourself, how can I ask my kid to feel comfortable in a setting that I don't even feel comfortable myself? And the clear component here is noticing that comfort, really what we're talking about is being able to feel settled in your body, even in an unsettling situation. And that settling, that experience of feeling settled is something that a highly sensitive child can experience when they feel capable of managing their emotions. Your child might be able to use coping skills in that moment, but only if they've been able to break out of the meltdown cycle. Because when we see highly sensitive kids who can tolerate going to these events, it's usually not an effectively skillful experience. It's more a shutdown, pretending that everything's fine, or freezing and just zipping lips and nodding and looking wide-eyed and just trying to hold it together. There's a lot of restlessness in their body language, and then the stress comes out later. The meltdown might be later in the day or the next day, etc. And so when we think about supporting your kid and being able to tolerate this discomfort, what we're doing is we're asking your child to control their emotions. And that is absolutely something that highly sensitive kids can do. And we've seen highly sensitive kids do day in and day out in the families that we work with directly. And so it is possible for your family as well. So when we think about the important component, it's really critically important that you notice that it's not developmentally appropriate for any highly sensitive child, ages 3.5, 4, and up, to be having daily meltdowns or daily shutdowns. This is an extreme ineffective coping mechanism that your child has developed based on their lack of skill of being, because they are overwhelmed with the world and they are noticing all of the small details of the world, experiencing empathy, but not knowing what to do about it and process it, and then processing things deeply, so much so that it takes a lot of time and it's very overwhelming as well. And so when we think about how your child thinks about the world and experiences the world, this is something that I call a case of the too many muches, when there's just so many things coming at them at the same time, and without skills to manage that, an uncomfortable situation can really go haywire to the point where you might wonder whether or not it's worth bringing your child to these events, even though that might mean, so say for example, a wake of a loved one, you might decide not to bring your kid, but in the back of your mind, or even in the front of your mind and in your heart, you might notice that you're doing that because you don't think that your kid can manage their emotions. But that means that you might be sacrificing their grief process because of that. Depending on your child's age and the nature of how your family grieves, it might be appropriate for your sensitive child to attend a wake or a funeral. And yet, if your child is engaging in the meltdown cycle on a daily basis, and we know that this isn't a choice of theirs, they're willfully throwing at you, right? Then that makes sense that as a parent, you would wonder, can my kid handle it? Can I even handle a meltdown in a situation like that? Because obviously it can be quite embarrassing, or at the very least, just taxing and logistically difficult to manage, because you need to be places and follow a line and, all the logistics of participating in a funeral or a wake. And the same thing related to attending doctor's visits. And obviously something like that is much more complicated to reschedule and manage, especially in today's day and age. Pediatrician offices are backed up and limited in being able to, with all the regulations that they need to instill, it can be really tough to get into the office, to get into the appointment. And so for you as a parent, you may be putting yourself in a position or thinking that the only option is to have your kid suck it up and just deal. But then that obviously impacts the ability of the doctor to evaluate your child in a way that helps you get clarity on what's going on, and ensures that your child is physically healthy, for a physical doctor appointment. And then when we think about being able to notice any challenges that your child is having long term, the important piece that we also want to talk about here is that you really need to understand what your child can and can't handle. And without a clear picture based on history of how other families who have broken out of the meltdown cycle have been able to do this, a lot of times your own child's history is what's going to dictate their future. Your beliefs of what they're capable of are probably likely, and I encourage you to take a look at those. They're probably built on your child's historical behavior. What you've seen lately in the last several weeks, months, or years from your child. And so when you're basing your child's capability based on their historical data, that can really put your kid in a box, and it really can put you in a position of feeling helpless or dread at worst, and at best just limited in the same way that your kid is, in terms of how to support your child in being flexible and in being able to tolerate new experiences, even if they're tricky. We're not asking your kid to whistle and skip down to the doctor and say, go ahead and poke and prod me and it's fine if there's a shot involved. I don't need to know that. I'll be able to handle it. Most children, highly sensitive or not, could have a problem with that, but with displaying that behavior. But what we are asking of you is to invite yourself to consider that your child doesn't need to freak out and lose their mind, and that you guys don't need to experience that level of stress and distress when in experiencing something that's uncomfortable. So this is important to understand. So what are the steps that you need to take? How do you break out of this pattern? What are the things that you need to highlight, right? So first is that you need to change the way that you think about your child, right? As we talked about here, your child's needs and your approach to parenting have to be shifted. And this is really important when we think about changing patterns like this. And I want you to notice how you're asking your child to manage their emotions and what you're expecting of your child. Are you expecting them to be able to present themselves as much more skillful than they actually are? And that's an invalidating experience. Or are you limiting your child's potential because of what you have seen in the past? And so either end of those, that pendulum is really concerning. And then in terms of noticing how you manage your emotions, how can you lead your kid? How do you lead your kid when you're experiencing discomfort? Do you shut down? Do you have the skills to manage your own discomfort? And if that's not the case, you don't have the skills, then it's important that you build them yourself, because highly sensitive kids learn best through their parents. Highly sensitive children need to change their behavior through their parents changing their behavior and through their parents teaching them strategic skills. And this is really important when it comes to understanding the highly sensitive trait and the concept of vantage sensitivity. Highly sensitive kids have a better vantage point of the world when they are raised in a positive environment. But it's not just about trying to be gentle or using solutions that are positive for parenting. It's really much more strategic than that, because a lot of those systems will start first with behavior management, and that is something that you've been trying for a very long time, is throwing coping strategies or limit setting strategies at the wall to see what sticks. But that is something that when you're breaking out of the meltdown cycle needs to happen after you've shifted the way you think about your kid, you've shifted the way that you feel about your kid and what's capable, and then also you've shifted how your child feels for themselves and feels about themselves. Because if your kid doesn't feel capable, all of those strategies will backfire, and they could be decent strategies. And this is why general parenting and general positive parenting for highly sensitive kids falls flat on its face, because the strategy and the sequence of that strategy is critically important. And so when we think about being able to shift this out, you need to be able to do all of this playfully. It's not just about having collaborative conversations with your kid and making sure that your child feels heard and understood in the conversation. Highly sensitive kids and children alike communicate through play. They don't communicate through lectures or long drawn-out conversations about what they're supposed to do differently next time. That intellectual conversation is not something they will remember or recall when in that big emotional meltdown or shutdown. Your child's brain at that point is not operating in an integrated way. Their logical brain, the left side of the brain, is not talking to their emotional brain, the right side of the brain. And you need to be able to build the skill set for yourself as a parent to support your child to integrate how their brain speaks to itself. And that is a complicated skill set. It's not something that you can just give your kid a sticker and expect your kid to perform, because that invalidates your child's experience that this is hard, and it requires much more practice and an effective strategic prioritized way. So when we think about what's important, right, you need to be able to give your kid feedback in a way that doesn't induce shame. And quite frankly, a lot of positive parenting for the general public actually perpetuates a shame-based experience. So I'm not just talking about eliminating threatening your kid, right? And I'm not saying that many of you are threatening your kid with physical punishment. I'm talking about, if you don't do this, then you're going to lose your iPad, or you're going to need to do this, and if you don't, I'll take this away. If then language is taught in many, many positive parenting programs, and that language is not effective for highly sensitive kids. And so when we think about being able to shift out of this dynamic, semantics are critical, and highly sensitive kids really need to hear things in certain specific ways, and we've dialed that down to a science. And it's why the work that what we do with our parents works so quickly, because the way that you say things and the delivery of your message is impactful in how you can influence your kid, and that obviously requires some pretty strategic data to demonstrate. And like I said, we've helped hundreds of families be able to break out of this pattern. And that means that we have this figured out. And parents can't, just taking some phrases from a book without understanding how or why it's working. It's very easy for a parent to get the gist of a message and then just try it on their own. And for you, I can imagine you've tried using communication strategies with your child to set limits that try to support them in understanding how their choices impact the consequences. But the way that you're saying things can be really quite counterproductive. And so when we think about the other way around it, right, it's also important related to your certainty. In parenting a highly sensitive kid, you need to be certain that what you're going to do is working. And otherwise your child doesn't feel like they like you know what you're doing. And I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but quite frankly, your highly sensitive kid can read the room, right? Your kid can read your emotions on your face. They can cut the tension with a knife, and they can feel that tension with a knife when you're frustrated, and they can also experience a big level of stress when you're not sure what they can handle, and that adds to their inability to feel capable in themselves. And when you're setting a limit, that's the last time, the worst time to be uncertain. With that being said, a lot of parents think that being firm and stern is what certainty means, and that's completely different. So it's important for you to understand that being able to rest in a strategy is not just relieving for you; it's also relieving for your kid, and that's really important for you to notice. So how do you do this? You need to also advocate for your child, advocate for yourself. Start to notice that you need help. Parenting a highly sensitive child is really, really hard, and it is not for the faint of heart. And I know that I know that you know that because you're learning and studying, and not a lot of parents will do a lot of that. They might read a blog post here or there and basically work their best way towards winging it. And just notice that if they're not spanking or threatening or doing things that how they were raised, then their kid's probably going to turn out pretty decently okay, and be able to manage in the world and function in the world. But this is something that as a parent of a highly sensitive kid who's stuck in the daily meltdown cycle, or highly sensitive teen who's stuck in the daily shutdown cycle, that this process just simply isn't something that you can keep on winging. You need to have a strategy, you need to be able to advocate for your kid so that you can set those uncomfortable situations up for success. So you can support your child in breaking out of the patterns of just holding it together until they explode later, or just engaging in outright refusal at the start. And that requires you to be able to speak up in a way that doesn't put your kid in a box, as I mentioned before. So how do you do all that? Well, you need to be able to notice what steps are critically important in breaking out of the meltdown cycle. And so I encourage you to go ahead and watch our webinar. We have a free masterclass for parents who are interested in getting the support, but also in understanding more around what actually works. And so you want to go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/5 steps, the number 5, STEPS, or meganthompsoncoaching.com/5steps_teen. If you're raising a high schooler and you're listening in or watching the show here. So we'll make sure that those links are available to you in the show notes. And with that being said, we'll cover that. It's a free training that we've offered for quite some time now, and it's been impactful for families to understand at a deeper level how highly sensitive kids need to be parented and what clearly needs to be broken out of in these circumstances so that you can help your kid engage in all parts of life without feeling like they have no skills and that the only option is an explosion or an implosion. So we are looking forward to you being able to have that resource. Again, go ahead to meganthompsoncoaching.com /5steps or meganthompsoncoaching.com /5steps_teen.